All right. Good evening and welcome to our late summer surplus presentation on jamming with HMP pectin. Preserve today, relish tomorrow. Our presenter this evening will be Shalinda Wilkins. Our chat monitor and question and answer lead is Maria Giovanni, PhD. I am your host, Tim Long, for this particular session. Just a couple of housekeeping things as we get started. If you would please make sure your microphones are muted. It cuts down on background noise, which makes it difficult to hear sometimes. And you can either write your questions via the chat or share orally during the Q&A periods. Who are we? The University of California Master Food Preservers online program. We are a community outreach, online-based, grant-funded volunteer program through the University of California Cooperative Extension that provides up-to-date, research-based information on food safety and preservation. Our mission is to keep Californians safe and well as they use culturally appropriate, research-based practices to safely preserve food in the home, reducing food waste, increasing food security, and providing engaging ways for Californians to explore healthy food. Note that any statements about products used or highlighted in this presentation are not meant to promote, endorse, or oppose an outside entity's product or service. Also, speakers in this event are not receiving compensation. We are complete volunteers. Our goals for this evening are number one, to learn about atmospheric steam canning, and number two, to learn about the use of high-methoxyl pectin. Our survey reminder, you should have received a survey when you signed up. We need your input. Survey questions were completed upon registration to provide us a sense of your knowledge coming into the event. When this Zoom session closes, a post-event survey will pop up in your browser to give us a sense of your knowledge after the event. It's important to us that we get feedback on what knowledge you have gained and the quality of the event we have provided. This will help us improve our content and delivery for the future. Thank you in advance for your time. And now I believe it's survey reminder. This is the preview of the post-event survey that you will receive once this Zoom ends, is closed out.
All right.
Shalinda, take it away.
Thank you, Tim. So I wanted to start with first letting you know that jam is a fruit spread. And there are different types. So you have the traditional jelly products, like the one we are making today. And then you have the low or reduced sugar ones. And of course, the fruit concentrates, like your apple butters. So what is a jam? A jam has crushed, chopped fruit and sugar. It also has an acid and a pectin. Now, there are three types of pectin. So you can get the natural pectin out of the fruit. So if you did a long cook jam, you would have natural pectins. Or you can use a high-methyl pectin, like the one I'm using for the jam today. Those are your traditional pectins, like this. This is a Sure gel, or Ball's traditional classic. There's others from Mrs. Wages and other things like that. And it's traditional. And then there's the low. So the low are the no sugar ones that you can have as little as 1% sugar to about 80. Now, the high-methoxyl pectin is also called acid gelled. And it's called acid gelled because you add acid in the form of a bottled lemon juice to reduce the pH and neutralize the negative charge of the actual jelly. Now, in that particular group of pectins, there is the liquid and the powdered. Now, today's recipe uses the powdered, but if you want to use a liquid, it just comes in a box like this, and it's normally a packet. You'll see them in like silver packets like this. Those packets you just pour in along with the fruit and the sugar, and you cook it. until it's boiled. And that's how you set it. And then for a powdered, like the ball or you literally just open it, add the powder itself to the fruit or juice, stir it up without the sugar. And of course, the lemon juice is used both times. You bring that mixture to a boil, and then all at once, you're going to add the sugar. It's very important that you measure this out ahead of time because you don't want to have sugar doing it one by one. You'll get clumps, and what will happen is you might have a watery effect at the end. So if you would like that, then go ahead. But you really need to do it all at once in order to get the gelled effect. So today's recipe is from the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving, the 2020 edition on page 29. It is the easiest recipe you will ever have. And if you're starting off, this is a great recipe for you, for kids, for anyone who wants to learn the basics, because this recipe will take you through it. So before we start, we will always start the same way. One, you're going to wash, sanitize, and disinfect the area. And the reason you're going to do it first is it needs to dry, air dry, before you start to do your process. So while this is drying, this is when you would read the recipe again. Gather all your supplies, measure them out, and have them laid out and ready. Now, of course, you've already washed them at this point. You're going to go through and wash all your tools, your jars, everything. Depending on if you're using the two-piece lids or the reusable lids will only be the only variation in this particular recipe. The ingredients. So you have sugar, bottled juice, yellow peaches, which are fresh in this case, and pectin. And this is traditional pectin, not instant pectin, not low sugar pectin. Can this recipe be done those ways? Yes. But today I'm focusing on the high-methoxyl pectin, which is in fact the traditional way of making it. So there are two types of sugars we normally traditionally use. It's going to be cane sugar or beet sugar. And this is the point where I need to tell you that we do not use white peaches. We only use yellow peaches because white peaches, we are not recommending them anymore due to their low pH. It means that we can no longer safely can them by water bathing or using the atmospheric canner. So let's go through the steps. The first step is to peel it. There are two ways to do this. If you're doing this recipe with kids, a potato peeler will work just fine. You'll just have to have more peaches. Or you can do the blanching method, which is you bring a gallon of water up to a boil, full boil, and then you're going to put next at the bottom of the peaches, drop them in for exactly 1 minute, then take them out and immediately put them in cool water. The colder the water, the better, for 20 seconds, and then the skin will peel off. Now, this is also a good time after you've completed peeling all the peaches to start your canner. If you're using the atmospheric steam canner, you're going to put around 2.5 quarts of water in it, and it'll bring it slightly above where the rack is. And you want to bring that water up to 180 degrees. It's a good time to also warm your lids, your jars, and your rings. So you can put them in and just let them warm up so that they're ready to go when we get to the final stage where we're jarring it. If you're doing this with a boiling water, you would do the exact same steps as you always do, which is bring the water up to a boil, go ahead and make sure you can submerge the jars. If you want to sanitize it at this point, you don't have to because this particular recipe says jam and process for 10 minutes. And if you have to process for 10 minutes, you no longer have to sanitize. You still have to wash it, but you don't have to sanitize them. So returning back to the recipe, after you've done this and started it and got your water going towards the 180 degrees, because this is a hot process, hot packing, excuse me, you want to go ahead and cut up the peaches and take out the stone, the pit, and go ahead and cut out pith. Some peaches will have a lot and some will have a little. This one has a lot. After you've gotten as much of that off, you can chop it up really finely. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take everything except the sugar and you're going to put it into a pot, make sure it's about twice the size of the content of the peaches, and mix it in. Now, when you're adding the traditional pectin, it's important that you don't just dump it all in at once. Instead, you want to kind of sprinkle it and then stir. Sprinkle, stir. And the reason you're doing this is you don't want clumps. One of the worst things that could happen is you have clumps, and when you start to heat this, you have to sit there and kind of squish it to try to get the pectin to disperse amongst the fruit. It is not a fun thing to do. Now, here's the other thing. When you're bringing this to a boil, you need to do it as quickly as possible. So use high heat, because what you want to do is not overcook the pectin. And I will show you an example at the end of what an overcooked pectin looks like. So now you've gotten to a boil. What do now? You're going to dump that big container of sugar, all of it, directly in and stir as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and get it back to a boil, stirring the whole entire time. When it gets to the point where you can't even stir it down, you're going to start your timer for 1 minute. After this 1 minute, you're going to immediately take it off the heat and skim off this white foam that you see. Sometimes you'll have a lot and sometimes you won't have any, but this is a good time to get it off. And at this point, you're going to take the lid. If you're using your atmospheric steam canner, remember, pull it away from you when you're actually taking it off so you don't get a steam rushing to you and burning you. And you also have to hold it at an angle because water from the steam will actually recondense on the lid and it pours all the water back in. So you want it to go right back into the canner and not onto you. Now, when you take the jars out, you want to keep it on low. Basically, turn the dial down to low on your stove, or if you're using an induction cooker, you can put it on low on that, depending on how you're doing it. And then you'll take one jar at a time and you're going to fill it. And then you want to fill it up to a 4-inch headspace and debubble. Be sure to measure again after you debubble, because there's always a little bit that goes down when you do this. And to debubble, you just either use a chopstick or a debubbler. So the item I'm using is actually called a debubbler. And on one side, it's basically a cone-shaped plastic stick. And on the other side, it actually has measurements, so I can figure out if it's exactly 1/4. After you do that, you're going to wipe the jar. You can either do it with a wet, damp towel, but I always use white vinegar on jams because it's sticky, and the stickiness actually will get your lid stuck. And that can give you a false seal. So once you've wiped the rim, wipe the threads, because you don't want the actual ring to get stuck either, you're going to put the lid on and the ring, and you're going to finger tight. So finger tight means that if it's on a towel, it'll spin like this. You'll get to a point where it literally just spins. And that is what finger tight is. Now, if you're doing it with one of the other methods, like putting a towel on top, it requires you to hold the hot jar. So I've always done it with a towel underneath, specifically because I don't like to get burnt. So it's your choice how you do it. Another way to do it is to tighten it all the way and then untightening it 1/4. But I find that this makes it really loose, as you can hear. And you will have a problem with either siphoning or it won't seal at all. And that's one of those problems you have to watch out for. Now, once you've got all of them done and got them all in the canner and the water is exactly 180 degrees, and you put the lid on the atmospheric canner, which is what this is, you're going to process it for 10 minutes. How do you know when to start the processing time? There's going to be steam coming out a little hole in the back of it. And that steam, when it's about 6 to 8 inches long, it'll also be at 212 degrees. Now, on the top of some steam canners, you'll find this little gauge, and the gauge is according to the manufacturer. So mine says letters and mine is U. So when it gets up to U, I know that it's probably at that point, and I still test the steam. The best way to test it is to take a thermometer with a pair of tongs and put it in. You don't have to stick it all the way in. You just have to stick it in enough to get a reading. And you don't want to leave it in too long, because you'll see that the lid actually does a jiggle because you're building up pressure. So take it, pull it out. If it says the 212, you're ready to go. Start your timer for 10 minutes. When the 10 minutes is up, immediately take it off the heat. So if you're like this particular picture on an induction cooker, simply push stop and it will literally just cut the heat off. You're going to wait 3 minutes before you remove the lid. Now, if you're doing the boiling water, you're going to do everything I just said. You're going to submerge it into water. You're going to do the 10 minutes when it's back up to a full boil. And then you're going to just cut the heat off, wait 5 minutes, and then remove all the jars. Now, when you're removing it from the canner, you're going to do the same thing like you did when you first opened it after you put the jars in to warm them. You're going to pull up at an angle and you're going to let the water drip back in on the side. That way you're not getting the steam on you and you're very careful not to get the water on because both of them are extremely hot. You're going to want to have a landing place for the lid. Otherwise it'll roll or it could burn you. Then what you're going to do is you're going to remove all of them onto a towel or a rack because you do not want it on a very cold surface. It could shatter the glass or it could make the seal not go, but I don't think that happens all that often. So you also want to keep it out of a breezeway and you want to leave it alone for 24 hours before testing it. So how do you know? Let's see if it lets me do it. Yeah. You will notice that the condensate is on it as well. And this is from another jelly that I did. It was a long boil one. It's not going. Sorry. Oops. So that is my presentation. If you want to make a jam like this, which is absolutely shelf stable and ready to go, there you go. If you have any questions, just let me know.
If you have questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand or just go ahead and speak up. We're pretty informal.
All right, Tim.
Okay, next slide.
Any questions? I think Sarisa, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Hi, I do have a question. I was wondering, you know how you were saying that either you can boil them and peel the skin off or have the kids like use a what was it, cheese grater?
Potato
that?
peeler.
Oh, a potato grater. Yeah. Do you notice a difference in the quality and the outcome? Do you have a preference over one over the other?
Honestly, it depends on who, like when I'm doing it with my kids, they don't really care that it's not as nice because I'm going to chop it up anyway. So it does not make a difference, but you have to add a few more peaches. So to get the right quality of peaches, quantity, excuse me, of peaches, you're going to need more. So if the recipe says 4 pounds, consider buying 5. I find that depending on the peach variety, you're going to have more anyways. So there was a recipe for plums and it told me I needed like 7 cups. 7 cups doesn't translate into pounds. So I had to figure out what 7 pounds was. I'm sorry, 7 cups was, translate it into pounds. And then I always add an extra 1 or 2 pounds over that. And I'm happy I did that because the plums I have were much bigger than the recipe thought I would have. So I ended up having enough to make an extra jam. I made a plum jam out of the extras and the original recipe was for a chutney. So always consider getting a little more than you need. And it's better to have extra than not enough. And if you have extra, you just put it in a jar and stick it in your fridge. It's delicious. Even if it doesn't fill the jar all the way, these are still refrigerator safe. They don't always have to be canned. By the way, I promised to show you what happens when you over process. This is what it looks like. This jam is the same peach jam, except if you notice, it's very, very dark. And when you open it, it pours like a jam. I'm sorry, not like a jam, but like a syrup. There's nothing wrong with it. It was processed perfectly. but it's not a jam. It's a syrup. So be aware of that. If you double process something, or if you overcook the pectins when you're coming up to that boil, you might end up with a syrup instead of a jam. But thank you for your question.
So Doreen has a question. She asked, do you add 1/4 cup of the sugar to the pectin before adding, I assume you mean the pectin to the fruit, or do you just add the pectin straight?
I just go straight because the recipe doesn't actually tell you to add sugar. Now, I know when you're doing the low sugar version, it might actually ask that because the manufacturer asked for it. But for the high methoxyl version, which is traditional, no, we always add the sugar all at once after we brought the mixture up to a boil. So it's not necessary. Also, if you look on the package for like the low sugar, it actually says it adds some sugar for you already. So most of them, you don't have to do that. Now, if you're using a commercial version, you might actually have to do that because I don't have a lot of experience with the commercial version, but the home version, I can tell you it's already pre-packaged for you. So you don't actually have to do that.
So you mean the commercial version of the pectin?
Yes, the pectin.
Okay.
So for instance, if you were to take this Sure Gel, this is the low pectin version or the low methoxyl version. It actually says dextro, which means sugar. It's got sugar in it already. You don't have to do that. Now, if you're getting like a raw commercial pectin, I do believe she's correct. You would have to add sugar, but this is already pre-made for you. So you don't have to do that extra work. Most of the pectins I use, I never have to think about it. It's a pretty quick. You just rip it open, sprinkle it on top, stir it in, and bring it up to a boil after it's all stirred. And I added the lemon juice. Remember, a traditional needs lemon juice. It's an acid gel, whereas the low pectin is actually a calcium gel. So that's why you can have less sugar, is specifically because it's calcium gelled.
Great.
Any other questions?
So Shalinda, can you assume that something's a high methoxyl pectin gel if it's just not a low sugar product, or is the product labeled that way, the pectin?
Well, the high methoxyl is just the commercial name for it. So you'll see things like, let me see, I don't think this one actually says it. It'll say traditional or classic. Like for a long time, the ball used to call this traditional. And when I went to buy a new one and it said classic, I'm like, what's the difference? There's no difference. They just rebranded it. But for the most part, no, they're not going to tell you that's what it is because the chemical name is something that companies need. But for us as the consumers, we really don't normally come across it, which is why I was so excited when I got the chance to do this, because no one ever hears the commercial name for it. No one knows that we call it acid gelled because we're using an acid. And it's just those little weird things that are so interesting. My timer is telling me my time's up. So Tim, it's all you then.
All right. Thank you, Shalinda. Great presentation tonight. If you would please sign up for our email list to receive notices about upcoming events. Sign up for our newsletter, which is probably coming next month. So this is a new portion of the organization, so we're still working on that. You can find us on Facebook. Just search for facebook.com/UCMFP, and please like us. That helps the algorithm help get us more likes and so forth. Upcoming events, next week on the 21st, there's a zucchini presentation on mocked and dehydrated. On the 22nd, there's one on fruit leathering. Times are about the same, 6 to 6:30. And thirdly, there's a zucchini presentation called The Cold Dry Facts. We hope that you will join us again for one of these events. And don't forget to fill out the survey after the class, please. Thank you for coming. We hope that you learned some new stuff tonight and will be able to take this back to your kitchen and do some more preserving.
Okay, I will say Sharon did ask about doubling the recipe. Shalinda, do you want to answer that question?
Normally you shouldn't double the recipe specifically because it will change the balance. and it takes to cook. And when you're trying to do a jelly, you want to, especially a traditional jelly, you want to bring it up to temperature as quickly as possible. You want to cook it as little as possible. But if you're
Oops. I think Shalinda froze, but she's right. You want to make sure that it cooks, all gets up to
double
the
it, but it'll
right
take twice. Long cooked jam is very difficult.
right. You froze for just a minute, so but you're back.
Sorry.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was trying to say yes. You do not want to double a jam recipe. Instead, consider doing one batch and then cleaning up and do the next batch. That way you don't come across the problem of overcooking your jam. Because remember, the pectins need you to cook quickly, especially traditional pectins, the high-methyl pectins. They don't want you to cook them a long time because they turn into this. They just don't work. So doubling it means that it takes longer to both boil and to cook and cook down the pectins quickly. So no, it's better to just do 2 separate batches. Sorry.
Yeah, I've tried it before. It didn't work very well. My product didn't set right. So Sarisa asked about mixing fruits like peaches and apricots or apples and peaches. Would that change it?
Yes, the best thing to do is to always find a reliable and credible recipe. I do know there are many, many recipes that do mix fruits. And for instance, if you were to make like this apple butter, which isn't a jam, but anytime you have something that's apple, you can replace it with, I was going to say plums, but I meant to say pears. Obviously, I want some plum jam. So for certain things, they're replaceable. For instance, the peach jam, I know that you can replace the peach for a nectarine, but not white nectarines because they have the same problem as white peaches. They have low pH, cannot be water bath or atmospheric steam canned at this time. We have no credible actual recipes that we can recommend. But yes, there are some times that you can, in fact, mix it. It's just find a recipe that you trust and try to stick to the recipe.
Yeah, and typically, especially like stone fruit, like peaches and apricots, yeah, those are going to be more similar. But the pectin values also change. So Sharon asks about where she can find the recipe, or where all of us find the recipe, and also about when people will receive the survey.
All right, so the survey will come when you leave. So when you hit leave, the browser will pop up and you'll be able to see, let's see if this. It'll pop up in a browser window and it'll have 5 questions. You just answer it and give us any of your feedback. I'm sorry, Tim, I stole your question.
problem.
Okay, and for the recipe, Travis, I believe you said you were sending them out the day after the survey comes out. Is that correct?
Yes, I will say we will try to keep these things to the time limit. I believe the survey technically doesn't release until I close the event as the host. So if now or in future you leave one of our events early, keep the browser open, don't close it out, and hopefully once the Zoom officially ends, it'll pop up in the browser. If it doesn't, don't hesitate to contact me via email. I'll put that in the chat now and I can send you a copy of the survey. And finally, yes, tomorrow in a follow-up email, I will include a copy of these slides as a PDF and a copy of a handout with the recipe that was covered in this event.
Okay, so there was a question about, is it safe to eat peach jam made with white peaches if I leave it in the refrigerator?
Yes.
So in other words, you don't heat process it, but make it and put it right into the refrigerator, I believe.
Yeah, that would be a refrigerator jam. So yes, refrigerating and freezing white peach jams are fine. It's just we can't can them for long term. So typically, if you are going to do that, you don't have to use the same pectin. You can just get a freezer pectin. So it's basically a low methyl pectin, just like the low sugars, except the only difference is it's specifically for the freezer. And I that's actually how I started doing jams. So I'm more familiar with freezer jams than canning jams on most occasions. Absolutely. By the way, white peaches make the best jam. So if you're going to do it, freeze it. It's safe.
And then she's asked about the survey popping up on your cell phone browser. Travis, do you know the answer to that?
That's a good question. I do not know, so I'm not gonna mislead you. If you have if you can email, well, I have your email, so that was Sarissa.
Right.
To avoid duplication, I will go ahead and email you, Sarissa, right as this event ends. I'll email you a link to the survey.
And you can also let Travis know if you if you did receive it that way, that you'll help us answer that question. Anne mentioned that she canned with low sugar pectin 2 days ago and learned last night about the white peaches. So I assume, Anne, you mean you made the white peach jam or jelly with and you heat processed it, is that correct? So you can unmute yourself if you'd like. Yes, okay. So yeah, Shalinda, do you want to respond to that? Because it has been 2 days.
Okay. Normally we say don't keep it after for 24 hours. But the question I have is, you heat processed it. Okay. Yeah. It's a safety thing. So I put it in the refrigerator last night. Oh, okay. So it's not that was it out 2 days, or did you, after processing, put it in the refrigerator? I'm sorry, Anne. Can you, I'm not 20
Okay.
hours after. Okay. I have to say this. I'm so sorry, Anne, but I would let it go. Not because you are absolutely going to die from it, but there's the chance that it didn't have a high enough pH. And that is what we're recommending, is why we recommend don't do it. It's specifically because it's the wrong type of processing. The pH is too low. We're supposed to pressure can because we fear botulism or Clostridium botulinum and the toxins. Now, I know you're going to argue, because I would argue, because white peach jam is the best jam. But it's up to you if you decide. But yeah, you should let it go. Toss it. I know. I'm sorry. I don't like to say that because I love white peach jam. Like I said, for freezers, it's fantastic. And I was absolutely horrified when they told me this. So I'm right there with you. So it's always freezer jam for the white peaches for me now. And I'm always saddened when I have to say that, because I love white peach jam. I'm sorry. So sorry, Anne.
Okay, I think we'll call it there, just for everyone's time's sake. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I see there's 2 people joining us at the last minute. Thank you for still joining us.
Yes.
This was recorded. A recording of this and yesterday will be available in the statewide. I'll include that in my follow-up email tomorrow. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us, and don't hesitate to reach out via email if you have any questions, and hopefully we'll see you at our next event. Thank you again.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Right.